Number 10. In 1926, two French sisters, Léa and Christine Papin, found employment as live-in servants for the Lancelin family. Historical accounts describe their behavior as unusual, as they seldom engaged with anyone outside of themselves and seemed solely focused on each other. Despite this, they efficiently carried out their duties and resided with the family for almost 7 years. However, a fateful night in February 1933 would change everything. Returning home from a friend's house, Mr. Lancelin discovered a horrifying scene. His wife and adult daughter were dead, lying in a pool of blood with gouged-out eyes and smashed-in faces. The Papin sisters were found locked in their room. After gaining access, the police located them on the bed alongside a blood-stained hammer. The Papin sisters swiftly confessed to the gruesome crimes. During their time in prison, Christine's distress at being separated from her sister led to her being granted permission to see Léa. Observers noted an extraordinarily close bond between the sisters, sparking speculation of a potential romantic relationship. However, medical experts who examined them denied any conclusive evidence of such a connection. In the subsequent months, Christine suffered a mental breakdown and attempted to gouge out her own eyes. Following their trial, Christine received a life sentence for being the mastermind behind the murders. Léa, on the other hand, was released from prison in 1943 and managed to secure employment at a French hotel using a new identity. While it is believed that Léa passed away in 1982, this information remains unconfirmed. Number 9. In the late 1940s, John George Hay emerged as a British serial killer whose actions were both heinous and shocking. His chosen method of disposing of his victims' bodies involved dissolving them in sulfuric acid, as detailed by sources such as Forensic Magazine. A distinctive aspect of Hay's mindset was his misguided belief that eliminating the physical evidence, namely the bodies, would absolve him of the crimes he committed. This misguided sense of impunity proved to be his downfall. Hay's arrogance led him to reveal the location of the remains of his final victim, Olive Durand Deacon, to the police, ultimately resulting in his capture. During his trial, Hay attempted to plead insanity and went so far as to claim that he consumed the blood of his victims. However, the court found him guilty in 1949, and a few months later, he faced capital punishment through hanging for his gruesome crimes. Number 8. During the late 1980s, Robert Berdella committed heinous crimes involving the torture and murder of 6 men. Tragically, he dismembered their bodies, placing the remains into dog food bags, as reported by the New York Daily News. Additionally, he meticulously documented information about each victim, a factor that later assisted investigators in substantiating the charges against him. Berdella's almost successful evasion of capture was thwarted by the courageous escape of his 7th intended victim, 22-year-old Christopher Bryson, who managed to flee Berdella's residence. Initially facing charges of sexual assault, Berdella's true offenses were brought to light following the police's acquisition of a search warrant. This warrant led to the discovery of human remains and personal belongings of other victims. Consequently, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, and he passed away due to a heart attack while incarcerated in 1992. Number 7. During the late 1970s and early 1980s, Dennis Nielsen brought terror to London through a series of gruesome acts, resulting in the deaths of 15 men over a span of 5 years. Nielsen's modus operandi involved luring young men from bars to his residence, where he would then strangle or drown them. Following their deaths, he would proceed to bathe and clothe the bodies, as reported by the International Business Times. Confessing to the authorities, Nielsen revealed that he retained the bodies for significant periods before disposing of them. This macabre practice was driven by his desire to engage in sexual acts and conversations with the deceased. Currently incarcerated at HMP Full Sutton Prison in Yorkshire, England, Nielsen is serving a life sentence for his horrific crimes. Number 6. During the late 1980s and 1990s, Herbert Baumeister engaged in a series of disturbing actions, as recounted by People magazine. His method involved enticing gay men to his pool house, where he would then strangle them before discarding their bodies in the woods near his residence. Baumeister's pool area was notably adorned with mannequins, arranged to simulate a pool party. Tragically, even his young son, Erich, unintentionally stumbled upon the remains of one victim while playing in the backyard. As suspicion grew around Baumeister, he fled to Ontario, Canada, where he ultimately ended his own life by shooting himself in the head at Pinery Provincial Park. In a heart-wrenching suicide note, he attributed his actions to a faltering marriage and business, never admitting to the murders. Law enforcement estimates suggest that his victims may have numbered between 10 and 20 individuals. Number 5. In 1965, the tragic discovery of Sylvia Lyken's emaciated body marked a deeply distressing incident. Indianapolis Monthly recounted how the 16-year-old was found covered in cigarette burns on a squalid mattress in the home of Gertrude Banisewski, 37 years old. Sylvia and her sister Jenny sought shelter with Banisewski due to their parents' nomadic work as carnival employees. A monetary arrangement was made, with the girl's father providing $20 weekly for their lodging under Banisewski's care. However, if the payment was late, Banisewski would vent her frustration on the girls. Gradually, Sylvia became the primary target of physical abuse. The shocking aspect was that Banisewski, a mother of 7 children living in the house, orchestrated and participated in the violent and sadistic acts against Sylvia. Disturbingly, even neighborhood children, some as young as 10, were invited to join or witness the cruelty, yet no one reported these atrocities. In October 1965, Sylvia was tragically beaten to death. Banisewski apparently coerced a neighbor into falsely reporting that Sylvia had run away. When police arrived, Jenny Lykens, Sylvia's younger sister, whispered to an officer, "Get me out of here and I'll tell you everything." Banisewski received a 20-year prison sentence, but was later released. She relocated to Iowa, changed her identity, and passed away from lung cancer in 1990. Regrettably, the others involved, primarily children, escaped with short sentences or no punishment at all. Number 4. In 2000, a tragic and horrifying incident occurred involving Catherine Knight, an Australian woman, and her partner, John Price. He was brutally stabbed 37 times by Knight, who then proceeded to skin him, decapitate his head, and even cook parts of his body. She went so far as to set her dining room table for 2 and served the cooked flesh with potatoes and vegetables. In an unsettling twist, handwritten notes were placed at each setting, bearing the names of Price's children, suggesting an attempt to serve them their own father. Upon the arrival of the police at the scene, Knight was discovered in a comatose state amidst spilled pills. Further investigation revealed Price's decapitated head simmering in a pot of soup on the stove. This gruesome incident led to Knight's historic sentencing. She became the first woman to be imprisoned for life without the possibility of parole. Presently, she is serving her sentence at Silverwater Correctional Complex in New South Wales, Australia. Number 3. In January 1968, Jerry Brudos caused distress among women in Portland. The New York Daily News reported that Brudos, who was believed to have a foot fetish, was allegedly connected to the disappearance of 4 women. Approximately a year later, the remains of Linda Saley, a 22-year-old woman who had gone missing the previous year, were discovered by a fisherman. As investigations unfolded, the police unearthed the bodies of 4 more victims, ultimately tracing them all back to Brudos. He openly confessed to the gruesome details of these murders to law enforcement. Brudos's disturbing actions included preserving the body of his initial victim for months, for the purpose of dressing her up. Eventually, he discarded her body in a river after removing a foot to indulge in his fetish for trying on heels and capturing photographs of the shoes. Equally horrifying was the revelation that Brudos collected mementos from his crimes, such as shoes, bras, girdles, and even a paperweight crafted from human breasts. Brudos' reign of terror led to significant fear within the community and his eventual confession to these heinous acts. Number 2. Dennis Rader, famously known as the BTK killer, was responsible for a series of heinous crimes involving breaking into his victims' homes in and around Sedgwick County, Kansas. He would meticulously stalk his victims before ultimately engaging in acts of violence. The moniker BTK stems from his chilling modus operandi: bind, torture, and kill, as documented by the Wichita Eagle. Between 1974 and 1991, Rader ended the lives of 10 individuals, though his reign of terror came to an end only in 2005 when he was finally apprehended. Subsequent to his arrest, law enforcement conducted a search of Rader's residence, uncovering incriminating photographs depicting him with his victims. Facing 10 counts of first-degree murder, Rader was found guilty and has since been serving 10 consecutive life sentences at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. The BTK killer's crimes struck fear into the hearts of many, and his eventual capture brought a sense of justice to the victims and their families. Number 1. The infamous Japanese cannibal's notoriety extends throughout his homeland. Raised in a privileged family, he harbored a disturbing fascination with consuming human flesh. At 23 years old, he was arrested for attempted rape, an incident that transpired when he invaded the apartment of a tall German woman in Tokyo. Though he bit off a portion of her flesh, authorities initially failed to recognize his intent of consuming her. The fact that he stood at 5 feet in height influenced his fixation on taller Western women, as shared in Vice. At the age of 32, while pursuing literature studies in France and obtaining a PhD, he formed a friendship with a fellow classmate, a 25-year-old Dutch woman named Renee Hartevelt. Tragically, this companionship took a fatal turn in 1981. Sagawa invited Hartevelt over ostensibly to collaborate on a poetry assignment, yet he ended up fatally shooting her in the neck. Over the course of 2 days, he dismembered and consumed various parts of her body. An attempt to dispose of the remains in a nearby lake led to his apprehension. Initially detained for 2 years, he was later declared legally insane and deported to Japan. However, upon returning to his homeland, he was deemed sane by psychologists and subsequently discharged himself from the mental institution where he was held. Presently, he resides freely in Japan, a deeply disturbing case that raises questions about justice and mental health assessments.